In the previous lesson, we related how the Alter Rebbe was saying the pasuk Pada b'Shalom Nafshi in Tilim when he was notified that he's being released from jail. The question was raised, how is it the Alter Rebbe was saying that chapter of Tilim, which is chapter 55, Kapitel Nun Hey, when it's known that the Tilim that we say is the Tilim as is divided in the days of the month. We know the Tilim is divided into 30 parts, and the part of Tilim that should have been said that day was of the 19th day, which is in the chapters of the 90s, not the chapter 55. Although the custom of saying chitas, the way we say it today, the Tilim divided in the days of the month, was only introduced by the Frierdiker Rebbe in the previous generation. But the Frierdiker Rebbe did say that all the Rabbeim, starting from the Alter Rebbe, in fact from the Baal Shem Tov, would say the Tilim as is divided by the days of the month. And the answer that's given is that although the Rabbeim would say the Tilim as they're divided by the days of the month, but when there was any kind of unusual circumstances, a crisis of some sort, then the Rabbeim would also say more Tilim. The expression that's used, they would say Tilim b'shufi, which means a lot of Tilim. What does that mean? It means that in addition to saying the Tilim as is divided in the days of the month, they would also say the Tilim as is divided in the days of the week. The Tilim is also divided into 7 parts, which means to each day of the week another part of Tilim. So because it was Tuesday, and this Kapitel Nun Hey is in the part of Tilim that belongs to Tuesday, that's why the Alter Rebbe was saying this Kapitel. That Tuesday, which was Yutes Kislev, is also the yahrzeit of the Mezritch Magid. And we see that there's a connection between the fact that it's the yahrzeit of the Mezritch Magid and the Alter Rebbe was released on that day. First of all, the Alter Rebbe himself said that he was standing at the bedside of the Mezritch Magid before he was nostalgic, before he passed away. It was the day of Yutes Kislev, and the Mezritch Magid took the Alter Rebbe's hand, held the Alter Rebbe's hand. This is before his istalkus, and he said to the Alter Rebbe, Yutes Kislev is our Yom Hilula, which means it's our day of celebration. So in fact, that day was Yutes Kislev. It was a Tuesday. The Parsha was the Parsha Vayeshev. And exactly 26 years later, it was a Tuesday again. The Parsha was Parsha Vayeshev. The same day of the month, Yutes Kislev, the Alter Rebbe was released from jail. The Mittler Rebbe also said that on the day of Yutes Kislev, it was Mincha time. There was an older chassid by the name of Meshulam Yaakov of Chashnik. He went over to the Amud to daven as the Chazan, and the Mittler Rebbe said, I saw the Mezritch Magid, and he said to me, right now the Nazi, your father, went out of the jail. He's still suffering a lot of pain, but that'll soon be over. And as we know, that was the exact moment when the Alter Rebbe went out of jail. It was Mincha time of Yutes Kislev. And even though he was released from jail, but the guard led the Alter Rebbe into the home of the Misnagid, as we told the story in the previous lesson. The Alter Rebbe suffered tremendously from the abuse and the words that the Misnagid said. So the Maggid said that, yes, he was released from jail, he's still suffering, but soon that'll pass also. So here once again we see the connection to the Mezritch Magid. There's another story told about a chassid whose name is Rabbi Yisrael Yitzchak. He was an older chassid of the Alter Rebbe. He was one of these people that used to be a chassid of the Mendel Haradaka, and then he became a chassid of the Alter Rebbe. And he was in the city of Lozhne when they came to arrest the Alter Rebbe. They were standing outside, many other Chassidim, and they saw the wagon, which is known as the Schwarze Beidel, the black wagon, stopped and parked in front of the Alter Rebbe's house. Armed soldiers went into the Alter Rebbe's house, and everyone understood that this meant they're coming to arrest the Alter Rebbe. And the black wagon was known that this was an indication whoever is arrested in this black wagon usually doesn't come back alive. And the chassid became hysterical and began to shout, Oy vey, shchinta b'galusa. What it means is that we know that it says when the Yidden are in Golus, the Shechina is in Golus with them. But in particular, whatever happens to a tzaddik is happening to the Shechina. As you know that a tzaddik is like the Beis HaMikdash. And just like the Beis HaMikdash is a place where the Shechina, Hashem's presence, is found, and when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, that's compared to the passing of a tzaddik, because whatever happens to the tzaddik, that means it's happening to the Shechina. And here he saw the Alter Rebbe is going to be arrested. He also shouted, Oy vey, shchinta b'galusa. The Shechina is going into Golus. And then he shouted, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, and fell into a deep faint. The Chassidim tried to wake him up. They tried everything. They couldn't get him up. In the meantime, the soldiers went into the Alter Rebbe's house. They arrested the Alter Rebbe, and then they took the Alter Rebbe out, led him into the wagon, and all this time this chassid is lying on the floor unconscious. Finally, somebody thought of an idea, and he shouted into the ear of the chassid, the Alter Rebbe was released from jail. And he said it once and again and again and repeated it many times, so he finally saw the color coming back to his face, and he was waking up. And naturally, they didn't tell him the truth for a while, until he later discovered Alter Rebbe is still in jail. When the Frierdiker Rebbe told this story, one of his chassidim, his secretary, his name was Rebbe Cheskel Fagan, he asked the Frierdiker Rebbe, how come he didn't faint the second time? And he answered him, the second time you don't faint. Which seemingly means that, true, the pain is the same pain, and the anguish is the same anguish, but the first time he was shocked when he heard the news, and he saw what's happening, and being that it was the second time, the shock isn't there anymore, and therefore he didn't faint. We related before that the Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe took upon themselves to fast every Monday and Thursday until the Alter Rebbe will be released from jail. However, there were certain Chassidim that took upon themselves to fast every single day. Rabbi Yisrael Yitzchak, he was one of those Chassidim that although he was an older man and he was weak, but nevertheless because of his incredible attachment to the Alter Rebbe and love for the Alter Rebbe, he took upon himself to fast every single day until we'll hear the good news that the Alter Rebbe is released from jail. And in his shtetl where he lived, those Chassidim who would fast every single day would come together at night in the shul and break the fast together. And naturally they would share with each other different thoughts, different feelings, strengthen each other, and this would go on every single night. When it came to Yutet Kislev, the Alter Rebbe had already been arrested for 7 weeks. It was Monday night. It was a Monday night, so everyone was there together. And it was a yahrzeit of the Mezritcher Maggid, so everyone came together to have a fabrengen, strengthen each other. And this Rabbi Yisrael Yitzchak was also sitting there breaking his fast. And Rabbi Yisrael Yitzchak was very tired and exhausted, and he fell asleep. In his sleep, in his dream, he sees his Rebbe, Reb Menachem Mendel of Horodok. And he said to him, I know that you're no longer my chassid, and now you're a chassid of the Alter Rebbe. But being that you used to be my chassid, I'll tell you what's going on here in the spiritual realm, here in Shamayim. Tonight is the Yahrzeit of Mezritcha Magid. And the Seder is, when there is a Yahrzeit of a tzaddik, that tzaddik is in his chamber, and he gives over words of Torah, naturally, of the secrets of Torah, which means Chassidus. And all the tzaddikim, all the other neshamas, come to his chamber to hear the Torah that he's teaching. And so too tonight, Mezritcha Magid was the one that was giving over the words of Torah. And the Baal Shem Tov was sitting at his right. The Arizal was sitting at his left. And he also told them about other neshamas, names of different tzaddikim that came to participate in the event. After the Mezritcha Magid finished giving over the Divrei Torah, he burst out crying. And he said, my student Zalmanu is in jail, and all of Chassidus is in great danger. And he said, he was begging, you have to do something for the Alter Rebbe. Suddenly, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai walked in, and Reb Shimon Bar Yochai organized a Bezdin. And the Bezdin gave out a verdict that the Alter Rebbe must be released from jail. And then he woke up. Of course, he told the other Chassidim what just happened. And, of course, there's a possibility that a dream is just nonsense. Haleim shavi daberu. But on the other hand, such a dream, and dreaming of a Rebbe coming to you, we can take it more seriously than that. And therefore they decided that as long as they didn't hear the news from the normal channels that the Alter Rebbe is released from jail, they will continue to fast. But now it'll be with much more simcha. And that's what they continued to do. They would fast. And 5 days later, it was Chavdalid Kislev, the day of Erev Chanukah, when the postman brought the mail to that little shtetl with the exciting news that Alter Rebbe was released from jail. And the day that he was released from jail was Yutas Kislev, the day that they had that dream. So here again we see the connection between the Alter Rebbe being released from jail and the fact that it was Yutas Kislev, the Yahrzeit of the Mezritcha Magid. After this day of Yutas Kislev, Tov Kuf Nun Tes, there became a new phrase, a new kind of vocabulary in the Chabad circles, and that is the expression of Far Peterburg or Nach Peterburg, which means before Petersburg or after Petersburg, referring to the time period before the Alter Rebbe was arrested and the time period after the Alter Rebbe was released from jail. Because when the Alter Rebbe was released from jail, that was considered a beginning of a new era. As we explained before, the Alter Rebbe's arrest, even though it was organized by the Misnagdim, and it was actually done by the Russian authorities, but in truth, it was being organized from a higher plane and from a spiritual plane, because there was an opposition against the Alter Rebbe spreading Chassidus. And when the Alter Rebbe was released from jail and given the green light to go ahead and teach Chassidus, that means that in Shamayim they gave the Alter Rebbe the green light to go out and spread Chassidus. So after the Alter Rebbe came out of jail, the Alter Rebbe began to teach Chassidus in a way which was much more than before, both in quantity and in quality. In other words, first of all, the Alter Rebbe's Maimorim began to be different. Before, they were much shorter, very brief. And after he went out of jail, the Maimorim became longer, which means the Alter Rebbe would elaborate and explain the concept of Chassidus in a way like he never did before. And this also means that quality-wise, it took on a different dimension. The Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Rebbe of Chabad, said that Yefutza Meinasecha Chutza began after Peterburg, which means that which the Baal Shem Tov heard from Melech HaMashiach, that his coming will be the Yefutza Meinasecha Chutza, when the wellsprings of Chassidus will be spread to the outside. So the Rebbe Rashab said, when did that really begin? After Peterburg. So although the Baal Shem Tov himself taught so much Chassidus, and Chassidus spread to so many thousands of people, and the Maggid and Mezritch taught much more Chassidus and spread to more thousands of more people, and the Alter Rebbe taught so much Chassidus, and the Chassidus spread again to tens of thousands of more people. But still, the real spreading of Chassidus to the outside began after Peterburg. And the reason for this is because after Peterburg, the Alter Rebbe began to teach Chassidus in a different way, in a different fashion. He began to bring down these deep, mystical, lofty concepts of Chassidus, bring them down more to a logical level, to a level where a person can understand it with the intellect, just like you understand any other concept in Gemara. And that means bringing Chassidus to the outside. The Alter Rebbe brought down the concepts of Chassidus from its lofty spiritual realm and brought it down to the logical, intellectual realm. And therefore it's considered the beginning of a new era. When the Alter Rebbe went out of jail, he also sent 3 letters. One letter was sent to all the Chassidim, to all of Anash. Another letter he sent specifically to Rebbe Levi Yitzchak of Aditchev. And the third letter he sent to the Baruch of Mezhebush. The letter that was sent to all the Chassidim is printed in Tanya, and it's in the 4th volume of Tanya, known as Igeres HaKodesh, chapter 2. It begins with the words Katanti. And the main thrust of that letter is that although Hashem showed us such kindness, of such miracles and wonders, nevertheless it shouldn't make us arrogant. But on the contrary, it should make us even more humble than before. And the Alter Rebbe explains how there are certain people that the more Hashem does for them, the more kindness Hashem shows them, and the more Hashem gives them, the more arrogant they become. So the more successful they are, the more arrogant they become. But the true way that a Torah Jew is supposed to be is to be humble in the first place, and the more kindness, and the more love, and the more Hashem gives, the more humble you become. Katonti mikol achsadim. And the second point in the letter is, where the Alter Rebbe refers to the Chassidim in particular, that they shouldn't become arrogant towards the Misnagdim. In other words, these very Jews who were the ones responsible for the Alter Rebbe being arrested. And they're responsible for all the aggravation, for putting the Alter Rebbe's life in actual danger. Nevertheless, they shouldn't be arrogant towards them, shouldn't tease them, shouldn't go and say to them, look, we won, and not express any kind of hate or negativity. On the contrary, to be pleasant to them. And the Alter Rebbe says, hopefully by you being pleasant to them, this will have an effect on them and their hearts will turn around and become pleasant to you. Kamayim aponim al aponim. The letter that the Alter Rebbe sent to Rebbe Baruch and Rebbe Levi Yitzchak, they were both students of the Mezritch Maggid, colleagues of the Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe had a very close relationship with them. And they were both of the greatest students of the Mezritch Maggid. And Rebbe Baruch was actually a grandchild of the Baal Shem Tov. The content of the letter the Alter Rebbe sent to them is more or less the same in both letters, but the Alter Rebbe describes the incredible wonders and miracle that happened here, and how it was such a miracle and so amazing that even the nations of the world, the ministers, and the non-Jewish authorities were amazed at the great wonders that took place. The Alter Rebbe also points out how the release took place on Yutas Kislev, the day of the Yosef of the Maggid, and it was while they were saying the words Pada V'Shalom. The Rebbe of Fabrengen once raised the question, why does the Alter Rebbe find it so necessary that in this letter that he's sending to Rebbe Levi Yitzchak and Rebbe Baruch to point out that the non-Jews were also amazed at the great wonders, and the non-Jewish authorities and the ministers. This is a personal simcha, a simcha in a sense in the family, that Chassidus can now be revealed. The Alter Rebbe was saved. Chassidim can go on with everything that was being done until now. What is it so important to bring in that the non-Jewish nations of the world, they were amazed and they saw the wonders? What is all that necessary? And the Rebbe brings out a remarkable point and says, being that the Alter Rebbe's redemption was not a personal redemption only, but it was a redemption of Chassidus, that the teachings of Chassidus could now be spread to the outside. And the purpose of that was not only for itself, but this is supposed to lead, and this is a stage that will lead to the ultimate redemption for the coming of Mashiach. This will bring Ka'osimar Malka Mashiach. So therefore, the redemption of the Alter Rebbe was of the same nature and has something in common in it with the redemption that will be the ultimate redemption of the entire Jewish nation. So one of the things which are, we can say, the main accomplishment of Melech HaMashiach is the effect that Melech HaMashiach will have on the nations of the world. True, Mashiach will accomplish tremendous things, and Yidden will learn Torah and observe mitzvahs, there will be peace, there won't be any hate, there won't be any competition, there won't be any hunger, and so on and so forth. But many of these things, on a smaller scale, we've already seen in past history. The one thing which will be totally new, and this will be totally, exclusively the accomplishment of Melech HaMashiach, is the fact that all the nations of the world will accept Hashem Echad, accept Hashem's kingdom. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe points out that his redemption was a redemption that had a tremendous impact on the nations of the world. That all the non-Jews, and especially the ministers and the people, the non-Jewish authorities, they saw that this was a wonder coming from Hashem, and they were amazed. So this brings out how there's a connection and there's a common factor between the Alter Rebbe's redemption and the redemption that will take place when Mashiach comes. In fact, in the year Tavshin and Aleph and Tavshin and Beis, when the Rebbe began to declare publicly that the ultimate redemption is coming imminently, and that Mashiach has already been revealed and is already affecting the world and making massive changes in the world, what did the Rebbe point to? Mainly, the Rebbe pointed to the changes we see in the nations of the world. The fall of communism and changes in terms of nuclear weapons, that the nations of the world got together in the United Nations and decided to disarm and to get rid of nuclear weapons. These were the signs where we see the effect of Melech HaMashiach on the world. In other words, the fact that we see that the nations of the world are making these changes, here's where we see how close we are to the coming of Mashiach. In fact, the Rebbe once pointed out and said, how come that in the nations of the world we already see massive changes, and yet we haven't received the order from Hashem to go ahead and build the Beis HaMikdash? So this has to do with the fact that one of the areas which expresses more than anything else the accomplishment of Melech HaMashiach is the effect on the nations of the world. One of the things we mentioned in the previous lesson was that when the Alter Rebbe was released from jail, he was held hostage for 3 hours in the home of the Misnagid. And during that 3 hours, one of the things he said to the Alter Rebbe was he wants him to give a Tkiyas Kaf, which means to give a handshake. Halachically, it means when you do that, you can make a commitment that has to be, you're responsible to carry through that commitment. And he wanted the Alter Rebbe to give him a commitment that he's going to meet with 3 great Torah scholars who are leaders in the Misnagdish community and debate with them on the subject of Chassidus. And the Alter Rebbe gave him that commitment. So the Alter Rebbe fulfilled this. I'm not actually sure what year this happened, but it definitely took place that Alter Rebbe met with all the 3 people that he wanted him to meet. The first one that he went to was one of the oldest scholars of that generation. His name was Rebbe Moshe Chayfetz. He was a man who was a genius. He knew the entire Shas by heart in the most incredible way. He was an incredible Torah scholar, and he basically looked down at everyone. He didn't give any respect to any Torah scholars because they were so much less than him. So when the Alter Rebbe came to him, he didn't give the Alter Rebbe any respect either, and treated him just like anybody else. And he began to ask the Alter Rebbe questions. But the questions weren't ordinary questions. Questions like, how many times in the entire Shas do you find an argument between Abaye and Rava? And the Alter Rebbe answered him instantly. And other questions similar to this. And that's when he realized that he has standing in front of him an incredible, brilliant genius and a brilliant Torah scholar. Then he told the Alter Rebbe, there's one question that when I was younger, I asked the great Torah scholars in my times to give me an answer to this question, and I never found anyone yet that found an answer to this question. And I say that whoever will give me an answer to this question, I will call him Rabbi Alufi Midoi, which means I call him my teacher. And then he presented the question to the Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe gave him an answer in the most brilliant way. And when that happened, he totally changed towards the Alter Rebbe. He gave him tremendous honor, tremendous respect, and he said to his wife to give food to this great guest that we have, Harav Reb Shnei Zalman. And naturally, the respect that he showed to the Alter Rebbe had a great impact on the Misnagdim, seeing the kind of respect that he was giving to the Alter Rebbe. The second person the Alter Rebbe went to was Rebbe Shua Tzeitlin. When the Alter Rebbe came to him, he also asked him various questions in Torah and about the Alter Rebbe's opinion and the Alter Rebbe, certain things the Alter Rebbe said in Chassidus, and he was very impressed with the Alter Rebbe's answers. But there's one thing which had a tremendous impact on him, and that is that he wanted to test whether the Alter Rebbe was truly a tzaddik. So when the Alter Rebbe sat down by the table, he turned to one of the people that were working in his house, and this person was not Jewish, but he spoke a fluent Yiddish. He grew up between Jews, and he spoke a fluent Yiddish. You couldn't tell that he wasn't a Jew. And Rabbi Shua said to him in Yiddish to go down to the cellar and bring some wine. He went down to the cellar, brought wine, and of course he wanted to see whether the Alter Rebbe would realize that this wine is not kosher because it was handled by a non-Jew. He poured himself a glass and poured a glass for the Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe started to make the bracha. Now he never had in mind that the Alter Rebbe should actually drink wine which is not kosher. And he figured that once we'll see the Alter Rebbe doesn't realize that it's not kosher wine, he'll stop him. But as the Alter Rebbe began to make the bracha, he made it with such dveikus, with such emotion, he never in his life saw someone make a bracha that way. And he was so overwhelmed, he couldn't stop the Alter Rebbe, he couldn't open his mouth to say anything. The Alter Rebbe continued the bracha, and he said, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, shehakol niyeh b'dvarim. And he was shocked, because it's supposed to be wine. The Alter Rebbe turned to him and said, this wasn't wine, this was med, which is like honey wine, and that's why the bracha on it is not hagotem but shehakol, and that's why I'm allowed to drink it. But you should know that being that you sent this non-Jew down to the cellar, now there's a question on all the wine in your cellar. And when he saw this, he realized how the Alter Rebbe was really a great tzaddik, and how Hashem protected the Alter Rebbe, and he used the term, only tzaddik kol odom, which means Hashem protected tzaddik, that he shouldn't commit an aveir. The third person he went to was Rabbi Yoel of Amtislov, and here too, he was overwhelmed by the Alter Rebbe's greatness and brilliance in Torah, and he gave the Alter Rebbe great honor, and as a result of these three visits, it only brought out more and more people in the Misnagdish community that respected the Alter Rebbe and saw the Alter Rebbe was really a great tzaddik and became closer to Chassidus and to the Alter Rebbe.